Welcome, everybody, to Fantasy 101, episode 4. I think I got that right. I think I got that right. Yes, I am Dan Vespris, and I'm just here to introduce today's episode. Slickrock will be bringing you the action on today's edition. This is a beginner's guide for folks that are playing fantasy basketball in year 1 or year 2. Slickrock is going to take you through all the things you need to know during this series, 1 episode per week, leading up to the start of this 2024-2025 NBA campaign. This show, of course, is brought to you by Bet Online, the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. Bet Online has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads to bet on during the games. Think you know your stuff? Get in on a $200,000 mega contest and pick 5 games against the spread every week for your chance at weekly prizes and a share of $200,000. And when the game's over, head down to the online casino, get in on a game of blackjack or poker, or unwind with one over 150 slot games. Head to the website today to get in on the action. Bet Online. The game starts here. On today's episode of Fantasy 101, Slickrock will be taking you through the lingo of fantasy basketball. Want to know what the hell all these analysts are talking about while you learn and read and listen and watch and all that good stuff? Well, this is how you get started. There is absolutely positively no reason why we should continue to wait. Let's get to Slickrock right now.
Hello again, my fellow fantasy fanatics. Welcome back to another episode of Fantasy NBA 101, the show where we look at not only how to play, but how to feel successful while playing in your first couple of seasons of daily fantasy NBA. My name is Slickrock. Had a lot of great conversations with y'all recently on YouTube. Nothing on Twitter yet, but hopefully we'll get there. It's been a lot of fun, though, hearing where y'all are at, seeing some of your results, seeing some of your questions. So please, get at me, at Slickrock, at Slick, R-A-C-H. Comes directly from my last name, which is Letterrock, ends with an R-A-C-H. R-A-C-H for the Twitter handle Rock as well. All right, so we're back with another episode. Last week, we talked about how you can, as a beginner, make it through a draft and feel pretty comfortable. This week, we're going to look at something we should have done a couple weeks ago, honestly, and we're going to look at some of the jargon that's associated with NBA, with fantasy. I think it's going to be pretty helpful because sometimes we can get into areas where things can get a little bit hard to understand, right? When you hear about punting, when you hear about a player's floor and ceiling, when you hear about flyers, if somebody's posting their tiers or their buckets, or we're talking about plotters, last round centers, this kind of stuff, you might be wondering what it all means. Well, that's why I'm here this week. I want to help break all of this stuff down. Let's get it. I want to start this week with a term that we've touched on previously, but I think is definitely worth highlighting again, and that's the idea of punting on a category. I want to make sure y'all understand, this counts in 8-cat, 9-cat, and roto leagues. You do not punt when it comes to point leagues. Point leagues just take everything you have, total them, give them an assigned point value. However, for 8-cat, 9-cat, and roto leagues, you might want to bolster your team based on an early draft pick that you have that is weak or hurts you in a certain category. An example of this would be if you draft Giannis at 5, 6, 7, wherever you get him. He's going to make about 7 out of every 10, 11 free throws, which is going to put a big damper on that category for you. So from there on out, you want to pick up guys that are still highly ranked because they help you in a ton of the other categories, but they don't necessarily push that category into contention. So if you grab Giannis, think about that next round. Do you want to get a LeBron or a Scotty Barnes? Somebody that's not exceptionally strong in free throws, but is going to get you in those rebounds, assists, and defensive stats. That next round, get a De'Aaron Fox. Even think about a John Morant. These are guys, again, that are not super strong in free throws, but will help you with the rest of that team build. Don't pick somebody that's like a Dame. One of Dame's strongest categories, and a reason he's ranked so high, is because that free throw percentage is so elite. So don't get a player that has these competing stat sets unless you really want to try and pull it back up, which is probably not going to be worth it if you take somebody like a Giannis. The next terms I want to go over are shutdown risk and silly season. Let's start with shutdown risk. We're looking at players on teams that are projected to tank. And when we're talking about tanking, we're talking about teams that are going to plan on losing on purpose near the end of the year. These teams tend to sit their best players down the stretch. They might say they have an injury, general soreness, a knee contusion, whatever it may be, to make their chances of losing higher. So you're looking at guys like Lauri Markkanen, Nick Claxton, and if he doesn't get moved, Jonas Valanciunas. Guys like this that are on teams that will not be making any sort of playoff push, but are elite players. Again, I know that Jonas Valanciunas and Claxton aren't necessarily elite, but they're good enough that they can help their team win games. On the other side of this is what's called silly season. When we get near the end of the season and these teams start to tank and sit their elite guys, we're going to get young players that will step up into roles that you're not going to see them in throughout the year. Oftentimes it's rookies or second-year players. So some people have been asking me, is it worth drafting an Alexander Sarr, Donovan Clingan, Bob Carrington, this kind of stuff? I would say no. But as we get closer to the end of the year and as we get closer to this idea of silly season, these guys are going to become much more valuable. So put them on your watch list and just know you're going to want to spring on them eventually, maybe eventually. Next, let's talk about the term flyer. You might hear somebody say, take a flyer on this guy. And that's someone you can grab at the end of your draft or potentially off the waiver wire as they do well. Take a flyer on him. Take a flyer on Asar Thompson, right? He could do really well. Awesome. Go for it. Give it a shot. But what you're saying on the other side of that is drop him if you need to. It doesn't have to be somebody that you hold on to for the rest of the season. Next, let's talk about what it means if we say a player has upside. That means that this player can beat the spot they're getting drafted in. A good example of this would be Jordan Poole. He's been going a bit later over drafts recently. His ADP's fallen just a bit. He's getting drafted around 100, outside within, somewhere around there. He has big upside because he could finish in the top 60 if everything breaks right for him. He could easily average over 20 points, 2.5 threes, 6 assists, and over a steal. Nice upside, right? So keep your eye on guys like this and understand that when you hear about upside, we're talking about guys that could do well if everything breaks right. Let's talk about some terms that are adjacent to upside, and that is a player's floor and a player's ceiling. A player's floor is where they could finish if everything goes absolutely wrong for them in the worst case scenario. Whereas the player's ceiling is how high they could go if everything works out just perfectly. Now, there's usually two types of players you discuss when talking about floor and ceiling. The first one would be somebody who has a high floor and a low ceiling. So that's a known commodity, somebody who you know exactly what you're going to get from them. You know it's not going to be much more and it's not going to be much less. Think about ex-Pacer Sabonis and current Pacer Miles Turner. Sabonis is going to end between 13 to 23 in the rank board. 13 would be pretty high for him. He's going to play every game. He's not going to get you a ton of defensive stats, but those counting numbers are going to be strong. Miles Turner, on the other hand, will end between 40 and 50, good block numbers, good threes, poor rebounds for a center. These two guys are super consistent, and you know what you're going to get if you draft them. On the other hand, there are guys that have low floors and high ceilings. For me, I think somebody this year that fits in that category is Chet Holmgren. They added Hartenstein this year. What does that do to him on defense? Could you see his block rate fall by a half to a whole block a game? I know that seems kind of outlandish and it's probably not going to be that big, but if that does happen, that's going to mean that he plummets in the ranks compared to where he's at now. Or does he come in and he improves marginally on everything and he becomes a really solid end of the first round turn kind of player? So it's hard to know with those guys. They have the bigger upside, but that floor could fall out and you could see him plummeting, and all of a sudden somebody you drafted in the second ends up being somebody who's sitting around the fifth round. I'm not saying it's going to be Holmgren. There's a ton of other examples, but he's just somebody who comes to mind. Let's talk draft terminology. You might hear about somebody's buckets or somebody's tiers. This is usually put out by fantasy draft experts, Dan, Adam, Josh, these kind of guys. They might put players in buckets or tiers because they think that they'll have similar value, and you, as the person who is drafting, can take your pick of the bunch. Doesn't matter, those values are going to be very similar at the end of the season. So you might see, for example, Jokic and Wemby could be in the same bucket. Whoever you prefer, take them. Okay? Next round, maybe SGA and Luka are in a bucket. I'm not saying they are. I have Luka over SGA myself. But if they were, go ahead and take whichever of those two you prefer. The way buckets and tiers can be helpful is making sure that the people who are in tier 1 get picked before tier 2. So don't start a draft and take SGA number 1 overall. You're going to lose value over taking somebody who is a Jokic or a Wemby. Next, let's talk about what it means to be early, mid, or late round. Again, a draft term. Early rounds are rounds 1 through 4, your first 4 picks of your draft. The middle rounds are 5 through 9, and your late rounds are 10 through 13. And those last rounds are when you can again take those flyers, the players that you don't mind picking up and don't mind chucking to the side if it comes to it. I wanted to highlight some terms that I've touched on before, and that is waiver and claim. You might hear somebody say you should put a waiver on that person or put a claim on that guy. Waiver position is assigned in reverse order of what you drafted. So if you had the 12th pick in your draft, you will have the number 1 overall waiver position. That way, if another team in your league rashly drops a guy that should be rostered and you want to have on your team, you can put a waiver claim on them. Now, players usually sit on the waiver for 2 days after drop before they can be added. This gives everyone in your league a chance to put a waiver on that player. If you have the best position, you will get that player after the 2-day wait period. So imagine somebody drops Chris Paul. Maybe they're annoyed with his low minutes at the beginning of the season. Use your top waiver position to make sure you go out, claim him, and get him on your team. If that claim goes through, you then move to the back of the pack for the next hot free agent that comes around. Couple more terms to get to today before I get you out of here. First is the idea of a top 100 player. This is a player who is averaging numbers that put him inside of the top 100 in terms of value and probably should be on rosters. Could include somebody like a plotting center. Again, somebody who gets you just enough. 12 points, 9 boards, 1 block. So these top 100 players are guys that should be rostered, and they will go in and out of teams all year long. You're going to see people picking them up, putting them on the waiver, picking them up, putting them on the waiver. And you should be one of the people who's doing that as well, because top 100 players can be recycled and used while they're hot and thrown off when they're not. Next one is the idea of a player being locked. So imagine that the season's underway, games are happening daily. You're going to have all these players on your bench. You're going to have active lineup spots. You're going to have your bench spots. If you notice too late that somebody that's on your bench is playing a game and you want to move them to your active roster spot, you will not be able to once the game has started. If the games have started that they're playing in, they are locked, they are on your bench, you missed out. So again, make sure you are checking those rosters every day so that you know the players you want to play are actually in your active lineup and will get the minutes and get the statistics that you want, that will help you bolster your stats, that will help you take down your opponents, that will help you talk all that trash you love talking to all those people you love. That will do it for this installment of Fantasy NBA 101. Got your jargon? Got you a little bit learned up on what you need to know when you hear those terms. Hopefully you feel a bit more comfort. Big shout out to the Old Man Sports Squad Network. Really a group of wonderful individuals. There's a ton of great material out there. Make sure you are checking out everybody's podcast, everybody's stuff. It really is pretty special. So thanks again to the Old Man Sports Squad. Thanks again to Dan. Thanks again to you all for listening. I'll be back with 2 more installments after this one, and then the season's underway. It's crazy that it's coming this quick. Again, follow me on Twitter, share your drafts, talk to me about players. Who are you thinking? Who do I like better? I love having these conversations. I'm not saying I know everything, but I am saying that if you talk about it with people, you have a much better chance of doing well than if you're just trying to figure it out on your own. I'll see y'all again next week. Have a good one.
And that was the awesome Slickrock. A big, big thank you for yet another amazing episode in this Fantasy 101 series, getting new players ready to tackle a year of fantasy basketball. We will have actually a second episode today here on this special Saturday. The run up to the season means we got episode after episode after episode. We're going to be talking to Alex Burns, getting a few of his targets. That'll be later on today. Tomorrow we'll have another episode. We'll have twofers every single day during the week leading up to the start of the NBA season. And then we slide into pickups and drops and all that fun stuff as well. We are close now, just 17 days away from the start of the NBA campaign. I am Dan Bespris. Yes, it's true. I am still Dan Vespris, at Dan Vespris on social. But again, this show is about Slickrock. This show is about getting you guys situated. Follow Old Man Squad on Twitter and Old Man Squad Fantasy over on Instagram. Have a great few hours here on your Saturday. We'll see you again in just a little bit. So long for now.